I'm Brian Howlett with Pro Video Coalition. It's a coronavirus NAB kind of interview series we're doing here. I am joined by Scott Simmons and Terri Morgan. We have Scott Simmons right here. He's in his home office. We have Terri, who's in her attic. She's talking in LumaTouch in Frame.io. And Scott, I'm going to let you take it over. Scott is our expert on everything post-production. I am a cameraman, and I do good with cameras and lights. But once I hand off footage, I kind of let people like Scott take over. So I'm going to let him do
That's
it.
right. Thank you, Brian. Yes, thank you, Terri. So Terri is one of the co-founders of LumaTouch, and they make the great iPad NLE Luma Fusion, as I have up here with some of my test footage as I begin to test a new NLE. I always bring out my numbered footage so I can see how things work, see how things operate. So that's what I've got loaded up right now. I'm keenly interested in Luma Fusion. It's a very cool little tool. Terri, first I want to start off by asking you about the Mobile Creator Summit before we get into Luma Fusion a little bit, which is sort of y'all's online mobile creator, I want to say, conference that's going on for multiple weeks now. Give us a little bit of a rundown on what that is and who you're partnered with for that.
Yeah, great. So Filmic Pro and LumaTouch are well, we're co-located in an office. We're not associated by business, but we do share an office space. And so we had planned on starting some training initiative together. It made sense. But when COVID started, we heard from a variety of customers who were out of work or just weren't getting the same number of shoots that they used to and as editing jobs. And we thought about what we could do to help our community in this downtime that they have. So we thought, well, we have a lot of trainers and people that really know mobile production, mobile post production, and how could we help them to learn a little bit more about? I mean, our other customers how to learn a little bit more about editing and mobile filmmaking. So we decided to create the summit where we invited, I think we invited around 80 speakers, and 70 of them immediately said yes, that they would like to speak at the summit. So it's a completely free event. And we have speakers that range from vloggers like iJustine to photographers like Photo Joseph, to news correspondents like Philip Bromwell from BBC. So it's been a huge turnout, and we're really happy with it. So we did our first event on last Friday, and we had a rolling average of about 750 viewers for the live event. And by Monday morning, we had 20,000 additional views of the content. So I think it was a huge success for the first week. And now we're going forward with the second week, and we'll do it for 4 weeks and then see how much more energy we have to do more of them. It's quite an undertaking to organize that many speakers.
Yeah, it's great because, as many of us, well, it's not many, everyone knows we are now at our home and not at NAB because NAB was canceled. So I think that's a great little way to sort of slot in there and do some cool stuff for the community. So yeah, thanks for putting that together. All right, let's jump into Luma Fusion. Luma Fusion is the nonlinear editing application app for iOS devices. I don't think it runs on Android, correct? Is it only iOS?
Not at the time. It just runs on iOS. And the reason for that has been that iOS has a foundation for video that is second to none. And we are testing Android, but it's not there yet.
Gotcha. I would encourage viewers to go to luma-touch.com and just give a rundown of and take a look at all the features that Luma Fusion has, because if you were to run down those bullet points and take a look at that web page, as an editor, you would go like, oh my gosh, it does pretty much everything that my Avid Final Cut, Premiere does, because it's got a ton of features packed into the application itself. I would first ask, I'm sure you know editing in Premiere, Avid, Final Cut, and normal desktop editing. What are some limitations that are put on an iOS device, stuff that maybe you can't do that you can do on the desktop? Is there any big stuff that sticks out that is just incompatible or incapable of doing on an iOS device?
Well, yeah, there is one main thing, and it is that iOS doesn't support some types of files, like ProRes, for instance. But what I'm going to show you today actually is a really great workflow for overcoming that and being able to edit your ProRes media using Frame.io and Luma Fusion with the proxies that are generated automatically from Frame.io, and then moving on to Final Cut with your XML file and all the information you need for your edit, and then relinking to your original ProRes file. So there are limitations in iOS. So one would be the file type that we're kind of have found at least one good way of working around. And then the other is space. There's a variety of sizes of iPad, but you can run out of space. And we've come with iOS 13, you can also overcome that by attaching a USB-C drive, a NAR box, or a Western Digital drive, and those drives show up right in Luma Fusion. So you connect to them and be able to look at the media on those drives and move. And as you drag the media to your Luma Fusion timeline, those clips are then transferred to the iOS device. So you're not using space that you don't need, in other words.
Well, yeah, I think that was one of the a huge limitation that was built into the OS itself. The fact that when I had tried to use Luma Fusion some in the past, it was you had to go through in the step of copying the media onto the device, and it's not super hard, but it's a step, and it sometimes takes some work to make that step happen. But with the new one, I with only knowing that you guys added that capability to the tool, I plugged in a USB-C drive. I happened to open the Files app, and I say, oh my gosh, the drive is there. I can see all the folders. I go into Luma Fusion and go through the mechanism to add it, and there it was. And I was bringing in those numbered files I just held up, which are all H.264 files, and there they are. Now you said something I wasn't sure about. If I load up a clip or a series of clips that it is on an external USB-C drive, did you say that Luma Fusion does copy it to the device, or is it always reading it externally off the external drive?
Right now, it copies the clip that you add to the timeline to the internal drive, because we've tested the direct connection through USB-C, and we can't do 6 tracks of 4K over USB-C, and that's what Luma Fusion can do. So we can't do that yet, but we expect that at some point we will be able to.
Gotcha. So when you're browsing the files on the drive in the Luma Fusion browser, you're still seeing them on the external storage, if I understood that right. It's only when they go to the timeline they get copied internally.
Correct. And so, that's one clip at a time. You can scrub, you can mark your in and out and drag to the timeline and edit as if it was on your device, but it's actually not.
Gotcha. Now, talking about the features, and I mentioned readers or viewers as well, going to luma-touch.com and reading over the bullet points, because, all the stuff you would expect, 3-point editing, you've got effects, you've got titles, you've got audio mixing, you've got, a track-based timeline, you've got audio meters. So a lot of the stuff, a lot of effects and things like that. So it's just really kind of amazing to see so much in an iPad NLE, which we've had iMovie, we've had Premiere Clip and Premiere Rush. We've had a lot of different tools to edit with, but I really feel like Luma Fusion is by far the most full-featured of all of those apps out there. Is that a safe assumption?
It is very safe to say that. I mean, well, both Chris and I come from many years. We worked at Avid. He worked at Pinnacle. I worked at Tektronix. I worked at Fast Multimedia. So we've been through a series of editing companies, even Lightworks back in the late 90s. So these are all editing systems that really take the craft of editing to heart and say, you need to be able to tell your story the way you want to tell it, and the editing system can't tell the editor or edit for the editor. So we're all about craft editing and really letting the individual be the creative one. So when we built Luma Fusion, we took all of the stuff that Chris and I had learned over the last I'm dating myself here, but probably 30 years, and really put it into the system. So
Very nice. Now, let's say if we got our system set up right, we can do a nice little screen share, and you're going to show us Luma Fusion and just, yeah, take us into there and give us, we talked about this Frame.io integration to let you work with other types of files. Give us a rundown, and I may interrupt you a time or two or 10 to ask you some questions as you run it.
as you can see, you have a multi-track timeline here. You can scrub, play, and edit 6 tracks of 4K media plus an additional 6 tracks of audio. And the timeline can scroll up and down to show those tracks. You can also do insert and overwrite editing, which is what we do as professionals. We want to be able to really control how the timeline moves. And one thing that we did when we built the timeline editing model for Luma Fusion is we combined what I loved about traditional editing, which is track-based, insert, overwrite, and the ability to control how my timeline moves, with the newer sort of paradigm from Final Cut Pro, which is the magnetic timeline that allows you to link and unlink clips. So if I go into a clip like this one and trim, you can see my clips are linked. But because we've done this in a way that respects the track and allows me to choose to do different things, I can go in and unlink that entire track. I can unlink a clip. So I'm going to go ahead and unlink that clip. You're not seeing my touches. So let me go into the preferences here and say show touches. That'll help you to be able to see what I'm doing.
I was going to ask you, you're doing all this touch as opposed to the new mouse support, or I guess touch is also, so you could use an Apple Pencil that gets some nice precise touching, so you could use all of
Yeah,
the above, I guess.
you can. You can use the mouse. You can use a keyboard. We have a whole keyboard commands, and shortly coming is a keyboard overlay that sits nicely on your iPad keyboard that tells you which commands
Oh,
are
that's cool.
available. But I've just fallen in love with touching my screen and touching my editing. So I've just gotten, we have a lot of control in here. We can zoom in once that timeline cursor here turns white. I know that I'm seeing a single frame. I can move frame by frame with gestures. I can trim and move things. So this is I have all the control I need and want with my finger personally. So that's what I tend to do. But
Gotcha.
anyway, so as you see, I'll just play a little bit. You can really play and scrub 4K media as well as you can on a desktop. And a lot of our customers say it's actually smoother than it is on their high-end desktop systems. And we can't take credit for all of that. That's partly, and maybe a lot of Apple's AV Foundation and the foundations that they provide. And we take full advantage of those foundations. That would be our part, but because there are ways of building an app where you just port over code from desktop or wherever, and we didn't do that. We built Luma Fusion from the ground up with all the latest iOS technologies, so we have a lot better performance than some other iOS apps do for video.
Does it support high? I think it from reading the bullet points. It does support high speed footage, or not high speed, but slow mo footage, which would be high frame rate footage slowed down. Like if you're shooting 240 frames a second with your iPhone, do you get that full support?
Yeah, you will. So if you put a 240 frame clip on a 30 frame timeline, we will automatically select the correct 30 frames to show unless you slow down that clip. So you could slow down that clip um, to 1/8 speed and then see every one of those 240 frames, right?
Gotcha.
And
So you have options basically. It's what.
you do. And like, for instance, let's see this clip here. If I double tap on it, you see I have frame and fit where I can just grab, I can rotate the clip, I can do cropping, um, and with that edge softness and corner radius, I can add keyframes in here. So if I wanted the crop to move, I could do that. Now it's going to move across the screen in that way. So you see how fast it is just to create really quick little things. But also you'll notice I have the speed editor down here. And if this was a high-speed clip, which it's not, I would see a tick mark on this line here that would tell me how slow I can go without having to invent new frames.
Mhm. I think it's worth noting there for people viewing this, there's your reverse, there's an option to maintain audio pitch. I think what people will find is there's so much stuff that you see in your main desktop NLE, you will find here in Luma Fusion. I feel like I'm saying that over and over, but I think that's what surprised me most when I played around with it. It's like, oh, I wonder how I maintain the audio pitch when I change clip speeds. Well, it's built
Right.
in. It's all there,
Yeah.
mostly
And
all there that you would expect.
right, we have an audio editor in here. If you turn on keyframing, oh, let me turn that off and go back to the beginning here. Turn on keyframing and say I want to keyframe the volume. I can do that while I'm playing, and it's
Automation.
recorded those keyframes. You can also go to any keyframe and delete it or whatever you want. You also have one thing that I think the journalists like about Luma Fusion is that you can record with two mics into a stereo channel, which they often do. And in Luma Fusion, you can choose how you want to configure that clip on the timeline. So do you want to fill from the left, fill from the right, or stereo? So in that way, you could duplicate that clip on the timeline and fill one side from right, fill one from left, and be able to control the levels of each individually. And then lastly over here, and there also is a title editor, but over here is this color and effects editor. So you can see if I go back to her original color, I'm just gonna go over to this and get rid of this crop so you can actually see what I'm doing here. Size and position, I'll double tap to zero that out. And on here, you can see I can add color and effects. I can change the brightness, the levels, the contrast, saturation, vibrance, and then you have the whole red, blue, and green separation down here and gamma. So you can really get in there and adjust clips until they look like you want them to. But you also have the ability to import a LUT from anywhere. You just go here and say, where do you want to import it from? We have also some included LUTs, like from Filmic, D flat and D-Log, but you can combine those with your own color correction as well.
I have a quick question on the LUTs. Do you is a specific kind of LUT file needs to be, or could you hypothetically create something Resolve?
You
export
can.
that LUT and put it
It's
in?
just the standard. There's some standards. I think it's 3DL for LUTs. There might be a second one, but I know that 3DL. Let me see what it asks for. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's 3DLs that are importable. But you can make those with any color correction system. And then you have a variety of fun effects, glows, glooms, dots, and so on, which maybe professionals wouldn't use so often, but they you can, if you're making a background, for instance, these things do come in handy, especially when they're combined with, say, a blur or other effects. So in a short little moment, you can create something that's pretty interesting without even thinking about it. And then from here, you can reorder these effects to create different looks.
Oh, cool.
They're all keyframeable. Each effect is separately keyframeable. So, you just find yourself having fun in here. And
it can be a time suck
it can be
wormhole
a
as you
time
get
suck
into it.
just because you're having fun.
Well, let me ask you a question. So, I think effects and things like that are cool, and they're great. They're great demo things. But like, you've got the timeline back out there now. But looking at the timeline itself, what about basic editorial tools such as trimming and match framing and all of that stuff that storytellers dig into first? as they're
Yeah.
putting their story together. Like I noticed with the keyboard hooked up, you have true JKL scrubbing, which is kind of nice. But what are some
Right.
of those basic editorial things that are?
Yeah, I mean, with the keyboard hooked up, you have I and O for in and out. You have jump to cut, and various things like that. For trimming, we have the ability, like I said, to trim frame by frame and keep things in sync, which is really the big thing. We can also do a slip trim. So let me go into this clip, and you can see what portion of that clip is being used, and I can slide that through that clip to choose a different portion of the at the same, the same
That's
time.
nice. I mean, but since we're on an iPad screen or even your phone, because it will work on your phone, you don't really have the screen real estate for true source record editing, and it always feels like it's a good implementation of the sort of the single viewer edit mode that Final Cut has implemented. Even though I personally still prefer source record, but
I'm with you. I mean, I do too. I have to say it took me probably a year back in, I don't know what year it was, but it was quite a while ago when I really resisted the idea of having a single monitor
yeah,
for recording. But it is an iPad and an iPhone, and the only thing I can say about that is that if you hook up a external monitor through HDMI or AirPlay, you can then there will be a little button that shows up on the interface here that lets you send your preview out to the big preview, and
that's cool.
then you can use more space for your timeline and library. I don't. I think it still is auto selecting though between source and record, like it's whatever you clicked
Yeah.
on last.
Well, I
But
think you did a good job of implementing the single monitor on the iOS devices, because it feels much more proper in this case than I think what Final Cut 10 did, which just felt like, we don't have to have them both, so we're not. But I feel like the single monitor here, it really works because you almost feel like it has to be that way. But I would point out to viewers, if you look at the bottom of the screen right now, you see a lot of tools there, like the scissors, the trash can icon. A lot of stuff pops up. There's a lot of things there that you'll recognize as you play around. But
yeah,
third from the right is the layouts, and that if you click that, there's options for people to you can sort of play with the different layouts and see what feels better for how you want to work. Which is what I found myself doing, is kind of checking out which one I think is better for what what I'm working on, or what I
right.
as I try to figure it out.
Right. And actually, oops, sorry, I just created a snapshot. But when you have the external monitor set up, you do have an extra row of those layouts to choose from.
So talk to us about you mentioned the Frame.io integration, and I've seen this, there's two questions I see a lot about Luma Fusion is editing with other formats that isn't H.264, ProRes being one. And the other one is always the issue of, oh my gosh, how quickly is it going to fill up my iOS device with media clips? So go ahead and take us through the Frame.io thing. I hadn't heard of that.
In case there's someone who doesn't know what Frame.io is, I'm not sure if there's very many of those people left, but just
I don't think there are any.
It's a remote workflow solution built for video teams of all sizes. And it allows members of the team to comment on the source media, reply to comments, and also comment on projects or works in progress that have been uploaded there. And so you can see my Frame.io library here of this particular shoot. And I have a clip. Let's see if I can get this clip up. Yeah. So I have a clip here, and Chris has commented, use from here on for blossoms flying. Okay, so this is in Frame.io, but the great thing that we've done in LumaTouch is integrate that with our own library. But if I go to that marker, I see it right here in LumaTouch automatically. So any comments that come into the footage from the producer or team member will show up here. So I could have someone log my footage, I could have someone approve my footage, and then I can edit it into Luma Fusion. So let me just take this part of this he says it starts from here. I'm going to use JKL to go backwards, mark an in, go forward, get her blowing the clips. And then let me see where I want to put that. I think I'll put that right in here. So now I can drag that clip to Luma Fusion. And as I talked about earlier, it's going to download that, what it needs to do, that edit in the background. So I can still continue to play and trim and do anything I want. And it's quite quick. Now I have that clip in our timeline.
So what you've done there is you've logged into Frame.io from within Luma Fusion, and that will then see your full Frame.io library.
Yes. And
wait, so where do you do that? I'm looking at Luma Fusion right now. Is that upcoming thing, or
yes,
is it?
it's heading into beta in this week, and then it'll be, we'll let them pound on it for a couple weeks, but it's pretty great feature. But the cool thing about Frame.io is in the background, they are delivering us clips that are perfect for iOS. So whatever I put into Frame.io, if I put in there my ProRes or any other media, it's going to transcode it for me automatically. It just quickly shows up here in Luma Fusion, and it's the clip I can use. And then the workflow would be, I've edited my stuff, and I go right out to XML, and from there it goes to Final Cut, and I can relink to my original media by looking at Frame.io with Final Cut, which is because it's integrated there as well.
Or I'll say you could put that XML in Resolve and then spit it out to any other place you wanted to.
Yeah.
Even though that may not be officially supported, but
it may not be officially. I mean, so the funny thing and the horrible thing about XML is it's, first of all, a somewhat limited format, but also it's customized for every single editor. So we make this one for Final Cut. If Final Cut does a conversion to Resolve, then you might be able to import it to Final Cut and then convert it to some others, Premiere or Resolve or whatever. But we have only built the integration for the Final Cut Pro timeline.
Gotcha. But I guess there's no reason saying you couldn't build the old Final Cut 7 XML that could go into Premiere, or I guess AAF into Avid if.
There are definitely converters, that you can, if you have Final Cut, then you can convert it to probably anything, I'm guessing.
Wait, I mean, is that a possibility in the future, just building the old, like the Premiere XML into the Luma Fusion interface, where you wouldn't have to do the conversion?
I mean, it would be a possibility for us to support Premiere, but we have such a huge list of things that we're working on. I couldn't say we would do it this year.
Well, I tell you, I wrote an article years ago when Avid used to own, I think, Pinnacle, and they had their own little NLE for the iPad. And I said, when it came out, it wasn't what I expected. I dreamed of something where I could say, be an Avid and say, you know what, take these 9 interview clips and spit them over to the iPad. Let me sit on the couch and just build a quick little radio edit, and then go back to the Avid and conform that in there. But what I'm seeing here is something that could be very similar. You could put your interviews up onto Frame.io, then sit back when this feature comes out, and then do your radio edit there on your iPad, and then bring that into the into Final Cut or convert it. And
I mean, there are projects that that do require moving onto a desktop system, especially those that are shot on a format that needs to be converted through Frame.io or Narbox. I mean, they also do a conversion. So, but it's funny that you mentioned Pinnacle, because Chris and I were the lead developer and lead designer on Pinnacle Studio for Avid.
Oh, there you go.
When we worked for Avid. And it was when they sold our team to Corel that Chris and I went off on our own to create Luma Fusion.
Gotcha. You probably read that article way back when, even if you forgot about it, because I sent
and actually
I sent it to a lot of people.
being the product manager of that, I was pretty, I actually remember some meetings where I suggested the exact same thing to happen. So.
Oh, well, hey, look, we're in a new world now with cool new tools. So let me ask you about the other question I had, that people often worry about filling up their this limited space they have on their iOS device. Is there any kind of fuel gauge or something like, how does Luma Fusion make sure it's just not totally filling up the internal storage as you're editing?
Right. So when over here in the, let me see, you're still seeing this. So the Files app, you can, if you have your drive connected, you can add a link to it right in Luma Fusion library. So you would see anything that, in fact, I could add a link to my Final Cut. I'm not Final Cut. I'm sorry, Filmic Pro folder. So you can add links to anything. These are basically watch folders. So you can see media as it comes in, basically. In fact, this is probably my Filmic library here. So so the way it works is, if you have a drive connected, you see the media. As you drag the media to the timeline, it would then transfer it onto the device, because the connection isn't actually, might be fast enough for one clip, but it's not actually fast enough for us to play back all 6 4K clips over USB-C. So
when you bring a clip onto the timeline, since it copies that to the device, is there a mechanism or is there a way that Luma Fusion will delete the clip off the device if you discard it from the timeline and decide not to use it in your final edit?
yeah, in the settings of Luma Fusion, there's all sorts of cleanup options where you can decide yourself whether we should automatically remove media that's no longer used by any timeline, and you can decide per input, like whether you want to talk about the Files app or Story Blocks or your
Gotcha.
Photos app or whatever.
Well, I think that iOS 13 and the ability to see external devices really, in my mind, sort of like has opened this up into something totally brand new that I think that was a missing link that we didn't have that we do now. That
Yes, for sure. It is definitely, I think they've taken the iPad one step closer to the desktop. And so a lot of people have asked us whether we plan on doing a Mac version of
this was my
Luma.
next question.
Was it? Yeah. So, we could, because the engine was built for OS and iOS equally. So it would mostly be a matter of coming up with paradigms that transfer nicely to a desktop and mouse. And so it's a UI problem and a workflow problem more than a technology problem for us.
Well,
However,
it has a bit of the best of both worlds, which is magnetic timeline that still has tracks, which I'm like, oh, this is kind of like, I like this. I like both.
locking tracks, viewing tracks, sending just a single track out for sweetening, whatever. I mean, it does have benefits. But I feel like, so I've been in this business since, I guess, somewhere around 1988. So I've seen a lot of change. And one of the changes I've seen over those years is that things that seem far away and you think are 10 years away or 15 years away are 2 years or 5 years away. And I see that us spending our effort going to the Mac desktop would be a real backward step for us. So my goal as the designer and product manager of this is to make the mobile, especially the iPad, but also the iPhone version, be so robust and so full featured that there's just no doubt that this is a more integrated and fun experience to edit on your iPad, and powerful. So I think it would be a real step backwards for our general, it's our mission at LumaTouch to make the best mobile product. So
Well, I think that's definitely how people associate it, and I think you're probably on the on the right path, because we've got lots of good stuff on the desktop, and this is unique into itself on the iOS device. So
Yeah, there
we got
are
about
lots of great editors on the desktop as well. I mean, we'd be entering a full field of really heavy players. So,
totally. We got about 2 minutes left. Any other little feature things you want to point out there?
yeah, actually, there's another new feature that people have really been wanting to have besides the Frame IO, and that is copy and paste and multi-select on the timeline. So we've always been able to take a clip and copy the clip. So we just would copy here, and that would copy the clip and the attributes. So if I were to go to another place in the timeline, I could simply go and paste the attributes. But now you can also paste the whole clip with the
That's
attributes.
cool.
And then in addition, we've added a multi-select option. And I really love this option because there's 3 ways I can multi-select my clips. So the first way would be, let me just go back out here. Sorry. The first way would be to use these calipers to decide what parts of the clip, what clips you want to select. And then you can use the copy paste to copy those clips either to the same timeline or to another timeline. So you can move stuff around. Another way to do it would be to lasso the clips that you want to copy. And then so let's just do that. Let's copy those. I'm going to jump to the tail real quick and then go paste. And now we have an additional.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah.
And if I was to go to another timeline, which I think is the bigger thing, so I'm going to add a new timeline here, and then just go paste, and I can get now those copied clips. And you can do multiple tracks and multiple selections of that.
And so that new multi-select copy paste stuff, as well as the Frame.io integration, is in an upcoming version, right?
Right. Yeah, those are all headed to beta this week, and depending on what the beta people find, they're very imminent within a month, I would say.
Great. Last question. Is there a demo version of Luma Fusion? Is there any way to test it out before you buy?
There is not a demo version because we're not a subscription. We're a one-time purchase. So you buy a LumaTouch and have it forever. The Apple Store doesn't actually have I don't think they have a demo option for single purchase apps.
So yes, it's not easy to get demo versions of some software in the iOS App Store. It's just not the mechanism. I think what people will find when they search it out, that it's well worth the cost, even though it's not a $2 app. But it is so full featured when you compare how much you might pay for your Avid subscription or Premiere or even Final Cut. Like what you're going to get in there is pretty amazing for the cost.
Yeah.
So Terri, what is the cost of Luma Fusion?
The cost is $29.99, and it's a one-time purchase. And then the Frame IO feature and the copy paste multi-select, those will be free upgrades to the current app.
Great. I think people, if they search it out, what they'll find is that $30 round numbers is different than the $2 app that they often buy. But the features that you get for that $30 is pretty amazing when you compare that to how much you pay for a desktop piece of software. So it's very powerful for the cost. So Terri, thanks a lot. It's a fun little tool. I'm looking forward to editing my water balloon fight video that we filmed over our time here at home with the kids at home.
Yeah.
But that said, it can be used for much more professional stuff than your kid videos, but it can be used for a little bit of everything. So
Yeah.
Thanks for your time, and we'll look for these new updates coming soon.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.